So good morning to all of you. Thank you for coming, and good morning to everybody who's watching on the web stream. I'm Andrew White. I direct the Center for New York City Affairs here at the New School. The center is a social research institute based at the Milano School of International Affairs, Management, and Urban Policy. And we work on issues affecting the lives of families in the city's working class and low-income neighborhoods. Our research includes projects on public education and child welfare and juvenile justice, child and family services, and the politics of community development. And we're also home to InsideSchools.org, so you see a lot of our materials out there on the table. The Milano School is about training people to change cities and to improve neighborhoods and strengthen organizations. We offer master's degrees in urban policy and management, international affairs, nonprofit management, environmental policy and sustainability management, and organizational change. And if you're interested in any of those, if you want to learn more about the programs, please see myself or Jeff Smith after the event. We'd be happy to speak with you. I want to welcome Governor O'Malley. I'm very pleased to have him in the room. And before we hear from him, I'm going to introduce Jeff Smith, who is the Assistant Professor of Politics and Advocacy here at Milano. We both want to thank the Milano Foundation for making this morning's event possible, and I want to thank Andrea Marpiero Colomina and Jackie Wayans and a bunch of students for helping organize the event. We are at, our handle on Twitter is @CenterNYC, and if you tweet about this event, please include the handle. We're live streaming, and the video will be available on the web by Monday, probably. Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Andrew, and thank you all for coming. A special thank you to our guests, Governor Martin O'Malley, Slate's Matt Yglesias, and SEIU's Hector Figueroa, who you'll meet in just a moment. So in a parallel universe, the one in which a debt default would have, quote unquote, finally brought stability to the markets, according to Florida Congressman / large animal veterinarian / market forecaster Ted Yoho, we might be sitting here this morning under very different circumstances. Fortunately, common sense prevailed in Washington a couple days ago. And after it did, the nation was treated to a new spectacle when, to paraphrase the Huffington Post, 100 of the world's least self-aware people gathered on the Senate floor to congratulate themselves for finally resolving the crisis that they themselves had created. Perhaps more than any other moment of the last depressing month, this moment reflected the yawning chasm between Washington and the rest of the country, a disconnect that New York Times writer Mark Leibovich nailed in his book, This Town. We've long known about Washington's healthy self-regard and insularity, but the past week really put it into stark relief. As Congress haggled for days about whether or not its own members and aides would be eligible for health care subsidies, seemingly indifferent to the plight of families across the country suffering without food stamps and a world economy teetering on the brink. In 2012, the American public spoke pretty clearly. As a diverse majority of citizens unified under a shared notion that government should play a meaningful role in addressing our nation's problems. And as the Washington Monthly recently observed, the best way to ensure that people don't abandon this belief that government can be successful and the best way to diffuse the Tea Party's anger, is through results. Not just by creating new policies, but by making sure that they actually work. By reducing waste and targeting scarce public resources where they can make the most difference. By controlling healthcare costs as we expand access, by cutting crime, increasing student test scores, and making sure that neither big banks nor oil rigs explode. Leaders cannot rest after the ink is dry on legislation, but they have to have a passion for actually managing implementation as well. Last month, I was fortunate to attend an event with President Clinton, at which he said that he'd rather elect more Democratic governors than have control of Congress. Because while Congress bickers, it's at the state level, he said, having served 4 terms as Arkansas governor, where the rubber really meets the road, where the decisions that government makes really have an effect changing lives every day by creating jobs, equalizing opportunity, and fostering upward mobility. As Washington stagnates, the work underway in these laboratories of democracy is critical. I knew Martin O'Malley wasn't a typical governor within 5 minutes of when we first met. It was at the Kentucky Derby in spring of 2007. He'd just been elected governor of Maryland, and I'd just become a state senator representing inner city St. Louis. He asked me about my district, which faced many of the same challenges as Baltimore, and we compared notes. I asked him if he enjoyed being governor. He said, sure. It's a lot of management, a lot of data. Do you ever miss being mayor? I asked him. Oh man, he said, every day. Nothing beats the feeling of driving down a street after you helped get a couple vacant buildings cleaned up and you can just see how the block's been totally transformed. That's why I got into this business, you know? I did know. And that's been Martin O'Malley's driving force ever since he entered public service. Smart, effective government that lifts people and communities up. That combination of passion, compassion, and meticulous attention to detail as a mayor and then as a governor explains why Washington Monthly recently called him the best manager in American government today. It explains why Governing Magazine called him the best public official of the year. It does not, however, explain why The Atlantic claimed that he had the best abs in politics. Martin O'Malley is serving his second term as the governor of Maryland. From 1999 to 2009, he served as mayor of the city of Baltimore, where he was recognized by Esquire magazine as the best young mayor in the country and by Time as one of America's top 5 big city mayors. He served on the Baltimore City Council from 1991 to 1999, during which he was chairman of the Legislative Investigations and Taxation and Finance Committees. He's now served 2 terms as chair of the Democratic Governors Association and currently serves as its finance chair. Additionally, he serves as co-chair of the National Governors Association Special Committee for Homeland Security and Public Safety. He was appointed to the nation's first ever Council of Governors by President Obama in 2010 and named co-chair of the council earlier this year. In a time when we see government struggling to function on so many levels, I'm delighted to be joined here today by someone who's spent a lifetime making it function better. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Martin O'Malley.
Jeff, thanks very, very much, and thank you all for waking up bright and early and being here today. It's wonderful to be back at the new school. And Hector Figueroa, good to be on another panel with you, sir. Thank you for the good work that so many of your members do every single day. I enjoy coming to the new school, and I particularly enjoy being able to have a conversation with the young people who are going through the new school as well. So I'm going to do my very best to achieve something that most politicians and public officials find very elusive, and that is to be concise and to be brief so that we can actually have a talk and a dialogue. So look, let me just share a few thoughts with you here as we set up for our panel. Jeff, I really appreciate your kind introduction and underscoring some of the good things that I've been able to be a part of accomplishing in public service. And full disclaimer, whatever good I've been able to do, whether it was on the city council or as mayor or as governor, was primarily attributable to the goodness of the people I serve and their willingness to support oftentimes tough and singularly unpopular decisions, provided it moved us all forward together, provided that we were able to make progress for our city or for our state. I've found that people are actually willing to sacrifice and willing to do more rather than less if it means they're giving their children a future of more rather than a future of less. Like many of you in this room, I grew up at a time sort of between 2 ways of leadership. There was an old way of leadership that our parents and grandparents were very accustomed to, and it was usually ideological, it was hierarchical, and it was bureaucratic. But what my adult children and what these times demand is a different way of leadership. It's a way of leadership that's fundamentally entrepreneurial. In other words, when looking at any question or any array of choices, The new way of leadership asks not whether it's left or whether it's right, but whether it moves us forward or whether it takes us back. In other words, we need to do the things that work. It's also collaborative. It's not hierarchical. And it's relentlessly performance measured as well as interactive. The biggest question I think that we're here to discuss today is that question that's been on the table now for a couple of decades, even though we try to work around it and perhaps sometimes not address it head on. And it is the challenge that that wonderful, growing middle class of America is no longer growing, that incomes have flatlined, that accomplishment that we had achieved in mobilizing to face the external threats of the Second World War, our ability to have transformed that afterwards into rising incomes, into expanding middle-class opportunity, into reinforcing and strengthening in very concrete, measurable, and real ways the fact, the truth, that if you worked harder in America, at whatever income you started, you could do better. And most importantly, your children could do even better than you. That core of our being, that sort of reason for getting up in the morning and going out and oftentimes doing very, very difficult and tough jobs has been rocked over the last 30 years. There is a story I enjoy that Bill Cosby used to tell about a prize fighter that is getting pummeled in the ring. And finally, the bell tolls and he sits down in the corner and his trainer comes up to him and he says, you know, it's not what the other guy's doing to you. It's what you're not doing for yourself. And for the last few decades, as a country, we're like that prize fighter. It's what we're not doing for ourselves. Our parents and our grandparents understood that there was a certain balance required in order to strengthen and grow our middle class, in order to create that sort of forward-leaning momentum that allows people to get ahead. And somehow we were sold this alternative theory that if we somehow allowed the wealthiest 1 or 2% of our nation to hold on to more of their money, if somehow we reduce their obligation to pay taxes, that will magically result in a stronger and growing middle class. And it would be nice if it worked that way. That would be simple, wouldn't it? But it didn't work. In fact, carried to its full conclusion, and I hope it's a conclusion, it led to the biggest recession that our nation's ever had. It led to deficit spending that was greater than any president, and that's what we saw under George W. Bush. It led to job losses. It led to home foreclosures. So how do we make better choices? How do we move forward? I would submit to you that a lot of the truth lies in looking at the lessons of history and also the lessons that we see being played out in those laboratories of democracy that are our 50 states. And there are different models being followed. If you have any doubt about this, just listen to Governor Rick Perry from Texas. He came to visit Maryland very recently, and we had a good talk about things that work and things that don't work. He is one of those sort of Tea Partying Republican governors that think we haven't gone far enough with that Ronald Reagan theory of shut down your government, do away with your government, the only good government's no government, and that wealthy people should never have to pay taxes because they use their dollars so much more wisely than the rest of us. Rick Perry still subscribes to that. And I think that if you look at the results, I think the results speak to the failure of that model. Texas leads the nation in terms of the percentage of her people who work at or below the minimum wage. Texas has the greatest number of uninsured people of any state in the union. Their schools rank 17th in the country and are declining because of the big cuts that they've made to education. And Texas has the highest percentage of its people without a high school diploma. This is not a state with upward economic mobility. In fact, if you look at the spectrum, it is a state on the other end of the spectrum, a state where the arrows of middle-class opportunity are actually going down rather than going up. In Maryland, we have, over the last 7 years, embraced that balanced approach. We do believe that there are certain things that are so important that need to be done on such a scale that we can only accomplish them together. That we do believe in the dignity of every individual. We do believe that we're all in this together. We do believe that the common good is produced by the choices that we make. And so we have embraced a balanced approach. We've cut more from our state government in terms of spending than any modern administration in Maryland history, but we've also come together to do the things necessary in order to make bigger investments in education. We've gone from $4 billion a year in education now to $6 billion a year in education. We are the only state to have gone 4 years in a row without a penny's increase to college tuition. Was it an accident? No. Was it something that blew in on the Gulf Stream and a barometric happening? No. It was a choice that we made to make college more affordable for more people. We've done more rather than less when it comes to accelerating the innovation curve, creating things like the Maryland Venture Fund, creating the biotech tax credit, the cyber tech the tax credit. And what are the results that we've been able to achieve because of these tough choices, oftentimes tough choices? Maryland has the #1 median income of any of the 50 states. The Pew Center ranks us #1 in terms of upward economic mobility. We are #1 for research and development per capita, according to the Milken Institute, #1 for the number of working PhD scientists and engineers. Last year, we led our region, most importantly, in the rate of new job creation, creating jobs almost twice as fast as our neighbors in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Last month, we passed the milestone. We didn't reach the end zone, but we passed the milestone of recovering 100% of the jobs we lost in the Bush recession, and we still have a lot of work to do. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, hardly a mouthpiece for the Maryland Democratic Party, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has named Maryland the #1 state in the nation now for 2 years in a row in innovation and entrepreneurship. An Education Week magazine never happened before, but it happened in the middle of the recession because of the better choices we've made and the better results we've achieved, has named Maryland's public schools the #1 public schools in America now for 5 years in a row. These were not things that happened by accident. They were not things that happened without trade-offs. They were not things that happened as the result of easy choices. They were things that happened because of the tough choices that we've made. Some of those choices had to do also with our infrastructure. Rather than doing less and hoping that our bridges would become like trees and grow stronger with age, we actually are doing more on infrastructure. Not only our roads and our highways and our transit, we also have set records in terms of the amount that we have invested in school reconstruction and school renovation. We went after and won a Recovery and Reinvestment Act grant in order to create much better connected counties. All 24 of our jurisdictions now have broadband, which is not only connecting the public institutions and educational institutions, it's also connecting family-owned businesses, large, medium, and small, all along the way. We put together the largest public-private partnership deal in America in 2009 with Ports America, so that now we're able to accommodate those larger ships that are coming through the Panama Canal. We're doing twice as much as we had been doing on water and wastewater infrastructure. I mentioned before the investments that we've made in education. We still have a lot of work to do. We're implementing the higher core curriculum, a better core curriculum, and there's still plenty of work to be done. But the fact of the matter is we saw that things like early childhood work, and we also saw that you get what you pay for. And yes, we have asked our citizens to do more. We asked everybody to do another penny on what was the 42nd lowest sales tax in America. We asked our highest earning citizens to pay more, and when we made our income tax more progressive. But we invested those dollars. We invested those dollars in things that work, things that expand opportunity, that improve educational outcomes. We have greatly reduced now the gap between children who come from our lowest earning families and their peers from higher earning families. And these are part of the choices that we make that allow us to have a stronger and growing middle class. There's some of the choices that I know are being discussed in this mayoral campaign here in New York. If every major business group, along with all sorts of other groups, agree that early childhood education is a smart investment, saves you money long term, and also strengthens your middle class, then it would seem that we need to figure out how to do more of it rather than less if we want better results. And my guess is that as you move forward as a people, you will find ways to actually extend universal pre-K to more people rather than fewer. And we're working to do the same thing at home in Maryland. And let me just wrap up as we go to our panel here with really two other brief thoughts. In addition to the dollars and cents, the sort of investment choices we made, and we, by the way, also have a AAA bond rating. We're one of only 7 states that maintain that AAA bond rating all the way through the recession. So we do believe that progress isn't possible unless you're fiscally responsible. We also understand that there is no progress without a job, though. And so we've made the smarter investments and the better investments in order to strengthen our middle class. And there are also other things that we've done in order to create a more open and a more inclusive Maryland. Because we believe that when you follow policies as so many of the Republican governors have followed over these last few years, and you've seen it played out, right? They run on a campaign of promising to accelerate the recovery, and then when they get in, they become all tripped up and obsessed with these sort of culture wars, trying to roll back women's rights, rolling back voters' rights, rolling back workers' rights. What do any of those things have to do with strengthening and growing a middle class? We believe that when the North Star of our ship of state is all about strengthening our middle class and expanding middle class opportunities, that we make choices then that respect the dignity of every individual, that creates a more open society, that encourages people to vote, doesn't discourage people to vote. We adopt policies like the living wage, the first living wage ever adopted by any state in the country. We will no doubt in the next session be revisiting our minimum wage and looking at better choices we can make that will actually get those arrows of middle class opportunity moving in the right direction again. It's also one of the reasons that we passed marriage equality. And when it went to referendum, it's why the voters of our state supported it. Because the more open and inclusive our state, the better that is for building an innovation economy, the better that is for attracting and keeping the best and the brightest from cultures from all around the world that want to make Maryland home. It's why we also passed the DREAM Act on the state basis. And even when that was forced to referendum, the people of our state approved it with 58% of the vote, because we believe in the dignity of every individual. We believe we're all in this together. And we believe that when the more a person learns, that the more a person earns, and that's better for all of us. So conclusion. There is no conclusion. This work has to go on. It's never done. Every generation has not only a huge responsibility to continue this American journey, every generation also has a huge opportunity. Our challenges are enormous. The challenges of climate change, the challenges of sea level rise, the challenges that we confront because the population of this world is outstripping the pace at which the earth regenerates the resources upon which all of us depend. Huge challenges. But our opportunities are enormous too, if only we can remember the truths that our parents and grandparents understood, the truth that the stronger we make our community, the stronger we make our state, the stronger we make our country, the more she gives back to us, the more she gives back to our children and to our grandchildren. All economic systems are the product of choices. If we want better results for a stronger and growing middle class, if we want more opportunity rather than less, if we want our children to live in a country of more rather than a country of less, then together we need to make the better choices that achieve the better results. Thanks very, very much.
Governor, you want to have a seat up there? Now let me introduce our two other panelists for this morning. Hector Figueroa is president of 32BJ, Service Employees International Union, the largest property services union in the country, representing more than 120,000 property service workers. He was elected to the SEIU International Executive Board in 2012 and serves on its strategic partners and political strength committees. He's founder and president of the board of La Fuente, a tri-state worker and community fund, and serves on the boards of several organizations, including the New York Immigrant Coalition, El Diario La Prensa, sorry about that if I mangled it, the New York City Independent Budget Commission, the Brett Forum, the National Institute of Latino Policy, Good Jobs First, Align, and the New Labor Forum's editorial board. He's the recipient of many awards, including the Somos El Futuro Labor Award. I should have cleared this stuff with you beforehand. And practiced it a little bit. The Outreach Project Annual Service Award, the New York City Central Labor Council Distinguished Service Award, the Working Theater Outstanding Labor Leadership Award, and the Citizen Action of New York Progressive Leadership Award. Thank you so much for being here, Hector. This is quick. Matt's is a little briefer, but that doesn't mean he's any less accomplished. Matt Yglesias is Slate's business and economics correspondent, and he's the lead author of Slate's Money Box blog. Previously, he was a fellow at the Center for American Progress and a writer for The Atlantic and The American Prospect. Matt, thanks for being here. So I'd like to start out this morning, big picture, and then we'll kind of narrow in and get a little more specific. Starting out, let's talk about the paralysis at the federal level. I want all three of you to give your perspective in as concrete as terms as possible on the way that the federal gridlock that we've witnessed has impeded progress at the state and local level, particularly with respect to education and economic opportunity. Governor, you want to start off?
Sure, I'll start off. I think the fundamental for us, the way it's impacted it very immediately was on the backs of the hardworking people that either go to work in federal institutions or are contractors in our state. A number of families. I visited a food pantry in Colbert County, and last week they actually had 60 families that came in whose only breadwinner was a federal employee who suddenly found themselves without pay and furloughed. So there are many things we could be doing in Washington. The gridlock impedes so much of it. And let's hope that there's a sea change after this shutdown and that the prouder instincts of the party of Lincoln reemerge, huh?
So, Matt, do you think the fever is broken?
It's difficult to say, and I do think it's important to be clear. Gridlock, I think, is something that governors and mayors can survive. Gridlock is when things don't change because the parties disagree about the direction to take things. What we've seen has been a kind of a deliberate crisis creation, where what we just had now, it wasn't the status quo continuing because of gridlock. It was Republicans saying, well, we're just not going to have the federal government functioning. We're going to threaten a national debt default. That's very damaging. There's nothing you can sort of do as a business owner, as a city leader, as a state legislator, when you're sort of hit by those kind of shocks. And I think it would be aspirational at this point to get to the idea of gridlock, where just nothing happens, and then other people can go about their business.
Well said. Hector.
Thank you. First, I want to say good morning and thanks both to the governor, Jeff, and Matt for being here, and all of you. From our perspective, we represent some of the workers who were without jobs. They were not earning any income, and now we're struggling to make sure that the money that they lost can be restored, from the Statue of Liberty to many buildings owned by the federal government. We see this really as a challenging moment in the sense that we have to restore the faith on working people and on government. And even though this is totally I agree with Matt, deliberate, create a crisis, the fact that there's some wounds left of faith and trust on the federal government are going to be affecting both parties. Republicans clearly were responsible for triggering it, but we have to make sure that people feel that they can influence the choices of government, and that we can make those choices like Governor O'Malley so well explained. So we see this as an opportunity for us to go back to our members in our community, seize the moment, build momentum for immigration reform, get into a healthy dialogue about creating jobs in these countries as a priority, and we're going to do our best to seize that opportunity.
Hector, you mentioned immigration reform just then, and Governor, you talked about the Maryland Dream Act in your speech. Tell us, because I'm from Missouri, and we had a very strong anti-immigrant sentiment in Missouri, a big crackdown several years ago on immigration. Talk to us about how you message that, number one, and number two, what you've done since the legislation has been passed, or what you plan to do to sort of create some data to maybe show the rest of the country that this is an economic development tool, first and foremost.
We've prior actually to the passage of our DREAM Act, we had done an economic analysis of the nature of the talent levels, the skill levels, the employment levels, education levels of our various new American communities. Half of our population growth that happened over the last 10 years in Maryland were actually new Americans. So we had done that analysis. That didn't keep us from being a part of that same sort of xenophobic anti-immigrant wave that swept the nation with the rise of the Tea Party fever. But we managed to come through it, and the messaging around it, Jeff, and we still struggle in some areas. Maryland's called an America in miniature, and there are parts of our state where that anti-immigrant sentiment is still very high, and where local officials see it as some local officials see it as good politics to be blaming everything they can on newly arriving immigrants. But the big, powerful, and strong and inclusive language that we used was really rotated around the word dignity. The dignity of every individual, the dignity of every child's home, the dignity of every child's potential. And as a people, whatever rough patches we've gone through and however rightfully apprehensive we are about the state of our economy and middle-class wages, Americans in their core are very generous and forward-looking people. And it is still true that the common ground we share is the common ground we see in the eyes of our children, all of our children. And so that word dignity was something that we messaged with not only in the DREAM Act, but it was also what we messaged with on marriage equality as well. And we found that word and that broad language was something that resonated deeply with people of all faiths.
Hector, does this comport with what you see around the country?
Yeah, totally.
How many states are you all in?
We are in 11 states.
Okay.
Not enough, Hector, right?
Not
That's what
enough.
you're going to say.
There are a few states in the South we're planning a strategy for. We really see it as doing the right thing for working people in this country to pass immigration reform, creating a level playing field, and then elevating our commitment to the dignity and celebration, dignity of a human, person, of all people, but also the celebration of our diversity. It brings strength. I live in Jackson Heights, Queens, one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the city and the country, and it's something that we live with every single day, and we see how it helps the economy. If we were to pass immigration reform, some people think that $1.5 trillion will be added to the economy, and that the net gain of revenue from tax-paying, hardworking immigrants in business, in service sectors, in manufacturing, retail, will far exceed what people usually think. I mean, immigrants don't take, they give. And I think that in honoring that tradition of hard work that built this country, we build our democracy in better ways too.
Well said.
Matt was.
I was in Cleveland last week, which is obviously a city that is struggling with a number of issues, and the state of Ohio is a very sort of typically American place, and it was fascinating to see a sort of a small neighborhood east of downtown where a lot of immigrants from Asia have come in, and they've taken over warehouse spaces that had sort of gone vacant, and they're creating ethnic markets and restaurants and grocery stores there, and and you see that, the sort of modern American economy is really is made up of people, and it's mostly people sort of doing things for other people, whether it's surgeons or whether it's teachers or police officers or janitors, and that when more people come into the city, they creating jobs for themselves. They're finding opportunities that they didn't have where they came from, but it's creating jobs for other people who are driving the trucks, they're repairing the roofs, they're installing the electricity. And when you think about any kind of growing, vibrant economy, you're talking about new people coming in. You never hear about a place sort of achieving prosperity through depopulation. And it's quite depressing when you see towns or cities with vacant buildings, things like that. And I think, people understand that on some level. And then people also have a lot of concerns that, people need to address. But from pure sort of dollars and cents economic job creation terms, I mean, I think there's no question that more people is good.
Interesting that the president didn't waste any time right after this was resolved and came out and said, I want to make immigration reform my next priority. Is that plausible at all? Matt, you keep pretty close tabs on what's going on.
I mean, it doesn't sound that plausible. But, as with a lot of these things, I mean, the power is in John Boehner's hands to bring an immigration bill to the floor. We saw in the Senate, the overwhelming majority of Democrats are for it. Most Republicans are against it, but some Republicans are for it. And you can pass a bill like that. That's how we raise the debt ceiling. It's how we reopen the government. If John Boehner wants to let the House of Representatives get a vote on an immigration reform bill, a bill will pass. Maybe not exactly the Senate bill, maybe not my dream bill, but something good. I mean, we could make real progress here, but the speaker would have to be willing to let members vote, right?
Hector, what's the percentage of Latinos in John Boehner's district? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea. Probably not that many.
Probably not that many. So how do you pressure him?
I think the way to pressure him is to build a strong alliance between labor, community group, interfaith, and business. And there has to be a promise from those with resources that they're not going to finance Republican candidates in the primaries if they don't really support immigration reform. I was in a panel with the Chamber of Commerce, the Allegheny Chamber of Commerce at CMU on Tuesday, and there is a strong frustration within the business sector with the Republican Party on issues from immigration to how they handle the economy. And we have to tap into that. I'm pro-labor, and many times we're going to disagree with business. But this is one that we have to bring everyone with a common sense for the good of a country together to pressure the Republican Party to put out a vote. I think if a vote happens, we can win it. It's like the other team has the ball. There is 1 minute left, and we need a three-pointer. We got to steal the ball and allow for the vote to happen.
Jeff, if I could chime in here,
sure.
I think that there's full disclosure, I suffer from an unrelenting optimism, but I think that there's a big opportunity here for immigration reform. I really do. I rarely have Republican members of Congress in recent times heard from business leaders the question so often, what the hell are you guys doing?
Yeah.
And that's what they've now heard for the last several weeks, coming up to this self-inflicted wound of the shutdown and then the default. So our Congress has an opportunity to cleanse the palate of this bad period, really, and be able to say to those same business leaders, look, we got something together and we restored at least this piece of that balance of American progress, and we now have better immigration policies.
It may actually be the most plausible and easiest way for House leadership to recover from what they've done, the least costly way.
Yep.
So let me change gears a little bit and talk about education. Governor, I hate to do this, but I'm going to put you on the spot here. Since you talked a lot about early childhood in your speech, do you support Bill de Blasio's plan to tax people making over $500,000 a year to fund pre-K universally in the city?
Well, I'm not a citizen of the city of New York, but certainly what I understand is that his proposal is for early childhood education, and every business group acknowledges that it's the smartest investment that people can make in universal pre-K. I understand his proposal is to ask the higher earning citizens to pay 4/10 of 1% more in order to do that. I think that's an investment that the people of New York would support, And the people, I spoke to a few people yesterday who would have been in that category who were willing to do that. 0.4% more in order to have universal pre-K, I think, is a proposal that makes a lot of sense, and certainly a proposal that would long-term have a big impact on upward middle-class mobility, economic mobility. So
Well,
yes,
good.
I do. I mean,
Okay.
What I know of it, I'm not a citizen here, but I think it makes sense.
Matt, does that the research out there? I know you look at a lot of economic research, and I think I've seen a study from maybe the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis that says every dollar that you spend on early childhood will return over the course of someone's life about $7 back. Has that research been replicated, or tell us what you know about that?
I mean, there's an enormous amount of really solid research on the importance of early childhood. The challenge, with any kind of selling an expansion of government services and also of getting value out of it, of course, is that the program has to work. We've seen obviously this sort of really horrifying problems with the federal healthcare exchange websites. And when stuff like that happens, it really moves middle-class people's minds to say, well, sure, I mean, it sounds great to say we're going to have a universal preschool program, and I'm happy to pay higher taxes for it, but I don't want to pay higher taxes for a program that's horrible, or for money that's wasted. And when you see those studies, what it shows is that quality programs that work and have good staff pay off enormous dividends. And the challenge for politicians is to persuade people that these will really be high quality programs, that things really will work. I know this is something the governor's put enormous emphasis on measurement of the services to try to give people real value for their money. And it's hard, though.
And Hector, I'm sorry if I could
Yeah, sure.
just jump in again. I mentioned in the set remarks that we increased our funding for education in our state from roughly $4 billion a year to $6 billion a year. The individual decisions that made that happen were singularly unpopular, but our kids and our parents didn't disappoint us. To Matt's point, we were able to show that because of this choice we made to invest more in education, we were getting a return on that. Fairly recent, the move to universal kindergarten was a relatively new development in our state that we could only afford in recent years. But the first year that we did that, when I was mayor of Baltimore, actually, our first graders went from scoring below the national average on reading and math to an entire cohort that had the benefit of full-day kindergarten, scoring above the national average in reading and math for the first time ever. So I think Matt's point of being able to demonstrate that the investments and the choices are actually achieving the better results is critically important. And in re-election, in the contest, the rematch that we had, our opponent kept hitting us over the head. Oh, you did this tax, you did that tax, you asked wealthier people to pay more. And I said then, as I say now, none of these were things that we did because they were easy or popular or because we enjoyed doing them. They're part of the tough choices we need to make in order to make our children winners rather than losers in this changing economy. And I think that's the overarching narrative with the better results that we need to do a better job of as leaders of articulating and bringing people together in conversation around.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree. That's why we support, de Blasio's plan, and we also feel that it's about early childhood education. It's about opportunities for our children to have access to higher education if they choose that path, and if they don't choose that path, opportunities in the workplace, so they can earn a decent wage, have benefits, have the ability to form a family if they want to, and then having parents not 2-3 jobs.
Do you think you can move?
So they can take
Do you think
to
you can move the
the-
governor at all?
That we can move the governor.
I mean, he seems to be pretty skeptical.
He's very skeptical, and we engage in the conversation with the governor and with the Assembly and the Senate, not only on this issue, but also on the DREAM Act, on workers' rights, because the truth is we need a compact in New York that makes New York move forward. And like Governor Ahmad is saying, we need results, and the results are there all around the country. We have 11 states. We have seen that these things work. They work in Maryland. They work in other places. They can work in New York.
Quick follow-up. So, best schools in the country 5 years running, you said?
Yes, sir.
Tell us 2 other things besides pre-K that have helped make that happen.
two other things besides pre-K that have helped make that happen. One of them has been the drive to eradicate childhood hunger in Maryland by 2015. Thank you very much. Guten Morgen. Thank you. So because a lot of our children would come to school, the last meal they had was lunch the day before. So that's one thing.
Governor, in my home state of Missouri, we actually had a state representative who, in one of the fights on food stamps, she said, hunger isn't necessarily a bad thing. Hunger can be a great motivator for students. Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we have done is, and I think this is really important and sometimes is lost, we have engaged and listened to our teachers in a much more methodical and regular way to improve the learning environment and the ability to teach our children at higher and better levels. So we implemented a teacher survey. Like any good corporation, you want to hear from your employees. You want to hear from the people that are on the front lines and implementing these things. So to have achieved more of our children now take STEM-related AP courses than ever before. Part of that is the product of listening to our teachers, doing a better job of making available the training that allowed them to get the better skills themselves in science, technology, engineering, and math. But we haven't made our teachers the enemies here. And I think in a lot of states, for some strange reason, political points or because the governor didn't like the way their union rolled in the last election, they've made teachers the enemies, and we have not in Maryland. We have engaged them in a very deliberate and methodical way in the teacher survey that we do and an ongoing conversation. So those are the two, Jeff.
Okay, that's great. Let me switch gears a little bit and ask Matt a question. Governor, you talked about some of the tax credits that you've been able to establish to help stimulate jobs in some of the growth industries in your state, such as wind energy and biotech, and I think even film. You guys have a film tax credit. Yes. And Matt, my question for you is, how do you determine which industries really merit an incentive, and what are the best mechanisms to use?
Well, these are very sort of difficult choices that people have to make. But I think that the states that succeed really see what is the strengths that they have there, and they build on them. That one of the reasons that biomedical is sort of a good industry for Maryland is that the National Institutes of Health are there. Johns Hopkins University is in Maryland. So these are sort of core assets that were in the state before any major public policy changes. And then you say, we're going to go build on that. A lot of times, you go different places around the country and you'll see a mayor who's talking about, he wants to bring high tech and that sort of, computer programming, app development. And of course, those are great industries to have. But the problem is that's sort of that's everybody's idea. And not every single city is going to be able to replicate those kinds of things. And every place you go, even in the San Francisco Bay Area, the majority of people have sort of regular jobs. They're bus drivers or they're, building security and that kind of thing. And so, people really need to look at, what are the strengths that this region has and how can we allow those strong points to sort of grow rather than just kind of picking sort of total dreamland kinds of things. And that, I think that's part of it. Maryland is a state that started with a lot of strengths and has built on those kinds of strengths rather than chasing sort of fantasies.
So, one of the things that a lot of economists and urban geographers and sociologists talk about, and workforce development specialists, are the mismatches between people and jobs, either a skills mismatch or a geographic mismatch. I know, Governor, you've got this workforce dashboard in your state, and you've an initiative that helps provide grant money to companies that identify some of these skills mismatches and have programs to try to train people to fill those gaps. Can you talk about some of your successes in that area?
Sure. It's all still a work in motion, and there is a tremendous delta of opportunity to be crossed between the skills our people have and the jobs that are open for people because they can't find the qualified folks to fill it. So mention just two things very quickly. One is the earn bill. We need to change the way that we do incumbent workforce training and get away from the sort of traditional way where we would ask primarily what programs were funded last year that we should fund this year, and instead ask the emerging sectors, especially that are creating the greatest numbers of jobs, what are the skills that are most in demand? And give us a sector proposal, and then we'll fund that sector proposal driven by the employer demand for the skills that are out there. That's a different way to fund things. We call it the earn bill. Last year we put a few $1 million into it. The first grants will be awarded within the next month or two, and we hope to be able to increase that. And we have to be much more market-driven rather than institution-driven, academic institutions I'm talking about, when it comes to funding workforce development. The second thing has to do with you mentioned the dashboard. There's a common platform we've created now called the Workforce Exchange. It's akin to monster.com, I suppose, where we show it is a common platform that allows employers and job seekers to meet, and also allows our institutions, our community colleges, our private colleges to see down to a pretty granular level where the skills are most in demand and where the demand for training of those skills are most in demand, so that we can fill those gaps. So that common platform's called the Workforce Exchange, and like any good search tool, the more it's used, the smarter and more effective it becomes.
Hector, are you all involved in any workforce development initiatives like this to ameliorate that skills mismatch?
Well, we support those initiatives, and initiatives in New York that mayoral candidate Bill de Blasio outlined the other day to the Association of Better New York. In a breakfast, he challenged the business community and others to work with CUNY and create something similar to what EARN has done in Maryland. But I also like to say there is a responsibility on the side of the private sector. In the real estate industry, we have partnered with the Real Advisory Board, the Real Estate Board of New York, our employers, in building through a training fund, training for the new economy that is really on demand in the real estate sector, retrofitting, turning buildings green, dealing with the issues of climate change and adaptability. And we have trained 3,000 supers through our program, partly granted by the state and the federal government. Unfortunately, the program is running out of money, but it's those kind of initiatives that we can have. And they respond to the demand for an occupation, but they create demand in themselves because other building owners see the savings that energy brings, right? Energy savings, adaptability in the buildings, tenants like it, and that creates more demand in other buildings for that kind of training and development. So we think that government has an incredibly role to play here as a model, but we also need to have partnerships between unions and employers to create more opportunities the way it used to be decades ago. Unions were the center of innovation and creation of matching jobs, demand and supply of jobs. And in some way, I think increasing union representation goes hand in hand with these kind of opportunities as well.
Matt, can I ask you to address the geographic mismatch? I know Timothy Noah had a piece a couple days ago, which was really fascinating, which suggested that in the past, people have moved from one place to another based on how many jobs there are there and based on going from lower wages to higher wages, but that trend has stopped and actually reversed, and now people tend to be moving to states with lower wages and fewer jobs, which seemed kind of mystifying.
Right. I mean, I think Governor O'Malley was talking about Texas and a lot of the sort of failures of the Texas economic development model. But one thing that you can definitely say for Texas is that a lot more people live there than lived there 15 or 20 years ago. People are really sort of moving in that direction. Now, some of that obviously is Texas is warm weather, which people like. Texas is close to Mexico, so it's a good place to immigrate to. But a lot of it is that Texas has enormously affordable housing, and that is something that you don't really find in New York City, and particularly when you look at the combined housing and transportation picture. New York does not look so great. A lot of the East Coast, Washington, D.C., a lot of Maryland doesn't look that great. Of course, there are places where you can get, cheap places to live all throughout the Northeast Corridor, but they tend to have very poor transportation access to the main job centers, poor access to the things that sort of make these like great cities and great urban centers. And I think it's something that the bluer areas of the country, really need to work harder on, is making these places, not just places that are great places to live for the people who do live there, but places that are great places for people to come to from all around the world, and not just PhD scientists, but, middle-class people who want to be able to, have some space and have a regular commute.
How do you feel, Matt, about kind of the Richard Florida theory that it's important to create an atmosphere in a city sort of of tolerance and diversity that appeals to kind of the young, highly educated workers, because that helps companies want to relocate there?
I mean, it is important. I mean, he's not wrong. It's just that, brass tacks, bread and butter stuff, like, also really matters. If you have a nice sort of thriving area, lots of good restaurants and hotels and stuff like that, can the people who work in those places live in a decent neighborhood? Can they have a reasonable commute time to those jobs? Because that's really what living standards are made out of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead, Hector.
No, I just say very briefly that I couldn't agree more, and because it's fresh in my mind, when I went to Pittsburgh, the debate there is how can we create more affordable housing? Mm-hmm. Pittsburgh was losing population for 30 years and is now coming back, partly by high-tech, service sector. The healthcare sector is very strong, but they don't have enough affordable housing. Particularly the stock of housing is very old and deteriorating, and neighborhoods, entire blocks that need to be restored and renovated, and they don't have a good approach to immigration. And they're trying to reckon with that. Attracting new immigrants is part of what they are now thinking, because they haven't had that transformation that happened in other cities. But, going back to the point, it's really about how do you make working families, middle-class folks who are going to come to these cities, to our geographies, having a better life, from the education system to rewards at work and to transportation and affordable housing. We have been struggling with this question, and together in an event with the governor a few months ago, we released a paper that was commissioned to the Center for American Progress that we could send to you in PDF, which is States at Work, Progressive State Policies to Rebuild the Middle Class. And it's really that whole cocktail of workplace, schools, housing, and opportunities, and respect to diversity that can make cities thrive and grow again.
I think Florida's point, if people talk when they handicap or when they summarize Richard Florida's work, a lot of emphasis on ethnic diversity and also to be a welcome, inclusive place for gay and lesbian people. But he was also talking about the economic inclusion. And this is one area where we've done more rather than less in Maryland on affordable housing. And we found that for a roughly $10 million investment, we were able to leverage that or tenfold in terms of the new affordable housing. Henry Cisneros was in Maryland the other day and talked about the fact that some of our affordable housing efforts, especially at the county level, are among the best in the country. But we need to do more. And the transit-oriented development, the smart growth, all of these things that are about the new metropolitan economies of the future with the higher density are an opportunity not only for smarter land use and the protection of the open space we have, but they're also a tremendous opportunity for greater economic inclusion and the creation of a better opportunity society.
So one group that we haven't talked about today and that oftentimes gets left out, but a group that I'm passionate about is ex-offenders. 2.3 million people in prison in this country, and about 7 million people in the criminal justice system in some way. A huge amount of untapped economic potential. What are you doing, Governor O'Malley, to try to reduce recidivism, starting in prison and then after, post-release as well?
We've reduced our recidivism rate over the last roughly 9 years in Maryland from 50% down to 40%. That's a huge reduction in percentage terms. It's almost a 20% reduction.
And it's a huge cost savings to the state.
Huge cost savings. There's a couple of things. I mean, one thing that we one thing that we did falls under the category of what we didn't do. When the recession hit, we did not stop training people who are incarcerated with the job skills they need to survive when they get out. So we protected those dollars. In fact, rather than transferring any excess, we allowed our Secretary of Public Safety and Corrections to expand some of those programs inside. Another innovation that we've been working on that we need to do at a more impactful and larger scale was the pre-release mediation efforts. Oftentimes when people are in prison, or before they go back to our neighborhoods, there are a lot of family problems and a lot of angst out there that keeps them from having one of the three things that that makes success more likely, and that is having relationships and connections to people that love you, so or at least aren't angry with you and want to hit you over the head. So those mediation efforts, those pre-mediation efforts are something new that we've been doing that also works. We also have done a much better job of providing people with the basic identification card that they need in order to survive when they get out there until they can get on their own feet.
That's great. Any thoughts, Matt or Hector?
Well, I think you can't slight the impact of sort of broad national economic conditions as well. I mean, I grew up around the corner from here on 12th Street, and I remember that when I was in high school in the 90s, there was maybe there's still like a Wendy's and a Taco Bell on 14th Street right up here, and they had a help wanted signs in their window like for a year and a half straight, because people would get those jobs, and if they could hold down a job for like 3 straight months, you could go get a better job, because the unemployment rate was really, really low back then. And so companies that were like in those kind of industries, they were desperate to sort of get workers, and you had the employment to population ratio really, really rising, and kinds of people who might be considered unemployable today were able to get job opportunities. Whereas if you have this very high unemployment rate that we have now, you have a declining sort of share of jobs relative to the population. Of course, ex-offenders are going to sort of be at the end of the line for those kind of things. That's natural if you think about it from a businessman's point of view. And you need to have a sort of, a strong economy where people who don't have these sort of dark spots on their resume are all in jobs and are getting higher wages. And that gives the private sector the incentive to sort of reach a little bit deeper into the pool and give a chance to people who really do want to turn their lives around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to follow on that and the governor's answer. It's in our view, it's a combination of both creating a healthier labor market. That's why we support a campaign for the fast food workers to earn, to have 15 and a union. I think those jobs should be jobs that should pay more. But we also think that we have to address specific populations, and it doesn't help neither the labor market nor the crime rates when we send to jail young people for non-violent offenses at an early age. So we are supporting an increase on the age in which people are going through our system. And then once they're in the system, we need to educate them. We need to make sure that they have the support so they can reintegrate themselves into society and into the labor force. And not to do that is just to perpetuate the condition that it doesn't help anyone. So for us, it's really that important. But also we cannot overlook the decades and decades old inequalities that exist of opportunity based on race, based on neighborhoods, based on income, and we need to try to eradicate those to create a much crime-free and opportunity-driven society. We talk about the debt ceiling a lot, but we don't talk about the employment pit that hurts this country. And I wish that Washington could focus more on that. But you mentioned Jeff Clinton's quote before. The truth is that at the state level is where we can very often, at the city and state level, we can establish policies and initiatives that could project into what could happen nationally, and we should take those opportunities.
Briefly staying on the subject of crime, you want to talk a little bit about CityStat, what you did in Baltimore in the area of crime reduction, and how you kind of took those efforts and branched them into other areas of state government?
Sure, as briefly as I can. There is a big shift happening in the way we govern ourselves in our country. Never before have we had, because of technology, the ability to create common platforms to measure performance and to do it in as open and transparent a way as we do now, thanks to the internet. It is really you've seen it here in your own city with performance measurement, ComStat first, that allowed you to reduce violent crime by numbers no one ever would have believed was possible 20 years ago. But you've done it, and you've continued to be able to do it. We borrowed that in Baltimore. We applied it enterprise-wide, called it CityStat, put 311 on the front end. Every citizen, regardless of whether they live in a Democratic or Republican or black or white or rich or poor neighborhood, gets a customer service number when they call. That's a pretty revolutionary and democratizing advance. To be able to get a service guarantee on things, whether it's potholes or illegal dumping in alleys or those sorts of things. We have yet to see that really be embraced across states, but we are doing that now in our state. Some other states are starting to do that. It has popped into the federal realm in a few places. HUD-Stat, NASA-Stat, the way we track the recovery and reinvestment dollars, which everyone and their brother said would result in waste, fraud, and abuse, and it didn't, because there were 300 million eyeballs that could track and see where all of those dollars were landing. There is nothing more fundamentally important to any city's future or any community than public safety. And so we have reduced violent crime to 35-year lows as of last year. And there are fewer people incarcerated now than were incarcerated in Maryland 7 years ago. And it's a constant effort. But the performance measurement, running plays instead of scrambling, all of this has been the critically important piece. Baltimore, because of New York's example, achieved the biggest reduction in Part 1 crime of any major city, that is, any city over 500,000 people, any major city in America from 2000 to 2009. Crime is not something that just rises and falls like barometric pressure. It's either going up or going down because of the choices and the performance that we insist upon from law enforcement.
Thank you. Let me take a couple questions from the audience, if anyone has them. Yep. Got a mic right there.
Yeah, I'm struck that we haven't heard in this discussion of progressive state policies any discussion of pension reform. State, in my opinion, this is one of the biggest challenges state and local governments now face. They owe more for pensions and retiree health care than bonded debt. And although this is a big problem for red states, we've really seen blue state mayors and governors taking a lead role on this, with Rhode Island Treasurer Gina Raimondo, San Jose Mayor Chuck Reid, Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blake. And the reason why we've seen more Democrats get involved is because if your philosophy is to promote an active role for government, if retirement benefit costs are rising at a rate above revenues, that's a problem because you have less money to spend on things you really want to spend on. It's also a problem for tax increases because it strengthens your case that we need to increase taxes if it's actually going to go towards services and not retirement costs. So my question is that shouldn't blue states make a high priority of pension reform in charting out a new progressive state policy agenda?
Who wants to take that first? I'm glad to take that first. We had to tackle that ourselves in Maryland. We did so about 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember exactly which year, but I do remember it was the largest public employee rally that we've had in Annapolis. I mean, traffic was closed down. There were thousands and thousands of people. I got roundly booed because we had to make tough choices to restore the sustainability of our pension system. But we decided up front in that effort that we would do so with a view towards defending our defined benefit pension system, not to dismantling our defined benefit or phasing out our defined benefit pension system. So we had to do more as employer. We had to ask employees to do more, longer time to vest, longer years of service, greater contributions. But we're headed in a much better direction on that front. And without fiscal responsibility, progress is not possible for very long. So we're headed in a much better direction. We didn't vilify our public employees to do it. And I think all of us, I mean, so many of these things involve a mindful balance. Over the long term, Well, actually, over the short term, for those of us that are over 50 now, those golden years come up on you pretty fast. And we're facing not only a crisis in our country in terms of wage stagnation, that our wages are going down, we also are creating, we are in danger of creating a situation where the vast majority of people's only retirement plan is that they work till they die. And that's not really good for middle class upward mobility. It's not good for creating jobs for younger people either. And it's also not good for the dignity of people that are in their senior years.
Hector, you look like you want to jump in.
Yep, I'd like to jump in, and particularly on this issue about people working until they die, because they don't have retirement. We call it the working dead instead of the walking dead, right? And it's not a good prospect for the future. We think that the pension problem is not really the result of something inherently wrong with defined benefit pension plans. It was clearly the collapse of the financial market and the choices of relying on the stock market that many plans, were oriented to do as the stock market was generating return after return, and they needed to meet their fiduciary obligations. We feel that reform is necessary. We do not have that many members. We have a few, but we don't have that many public sector members that participate in public pension funds. But we think that public pension funds should be an engine of growth and investment, and that, in our opinion, without trying to intrude on public sector unions, we think that it helps public pension funds when unions and trustees on the city side or the state side invest those monies in infrastructure, in programs that the whole community benefits to, still mindful of the need to generate a healthy return. So connecting those who can build those programs to the pension funds are important. Pension funds also are important institutional investors, and the way that they manage the money can also help guide the practices of corporations. Perhaps pension funds could be open broadly beyond the public sector employees to people from the general public to participate in pension funds. That could be a way of generating more participants, more contributions, and could help on the financial standing of those funds.
And one of our senators in Maryland was pushing the idea of an employee option that every private sector employer would be required to make available. Not mandatory that the employer pay into, say, the 401k, but to allow the employee, just as they have on their paycheck the deduction for Social Security or withholding tax, to be able to choose, yes, I also want a certain amount deducted every pay period for my retirement planning.
Mm-hmm. Another audience question. Back there. Or actually, yeah.
Hi, I'm Joel Berg with the New York City Coalition Against Hunger. I was the guy who clapped when you mentioned your nationally leading efforts to end child hunger, and I thank you for that.
Thank you for clapping.
Yes. Anyone who's going to fight for this, I'll clap. A lot of the issues we've talked about have edged upon poverty, and I assume you believe, as I do, that many of the things necessary to strengthen the middle class, make housing more affordable, raise wages, make health care more universal, also can help reduce poverty. But I'm worried that the Democratic Party just stays away from the P word entirely. We use euphemisms like family struggling to get in the middle class, inclusion, opportunity, all those things. Talk a little more about poverty specifically and what you've done in Maryland about that and what you think the nation should be doing about that, please.
We have achieved the second lowest poverty rate of any state in the union. The reason why, though, we have so many more people nationally and so many children now living in poverty is because as middle-class opportunity declines, poverty rises. I mean, they both go together. I mean, that's why this is happening. Our economy's been hollowed out in the middle, and so there is no program that's more effective at reducing poverty than a job. And so I do believe that the largest consensus can be found around jobs and opportunity. When the Democratic Governors Association, and many of those men and women have also adopted the programs to eradicate childhood hunger, but when we talk broadly and talk to our whole state, a lot of our language is around opportunity and jobs. But the job creation and expanding middle class opportunity also reduces poverty. And so I do think that I think perhaps in the past we believed that a program would eliminate poverty. There are programs, and they're important programs, and we should not dismantle the safety nets, and we should not make gratuitous cuts to food stamp programs just to sort of pat ourselves on the back because Tea Party people think they're tough and they cut food stamps. Way to go.
But you saw that some of the congressmen who voted to cut that received millions of dollars in agricultural subsidies themselves in the same bill.
Sure, hypocrisy abounds. But so I do think that this is an important conversation, and I think that the conversations of poverty do make us uncomfortable, and perhaps we do need to talk about it a lot more, especially the number of children that are now living in poverty for no reason other than the poor choices we've made in terms of the economic system that we've defaulted to.
So I'm going to ask a closing question. I'm going to start with you, Hector, and we'll come down the line. You're in a room with Bill de Blasio, and you have 60 seconds, and he says, what should I do?
He should use government to restore economic equality in the city of New York, and he should really be bold and open to new ideas.
You give back some of your time to Matt here.
Well,
I think in New York, he really has to focus on housing affordability, not just as a question of ratios, not, what percentage of the new housing is affordable, but the actual quantity. How much is there in total? This is a great city. Lots of people want to come here, and you have to find a way to accommodate that in a way that creates jobs and creates opportunities for people rather than squeezes people out.
Matt knows what 60 seconds is better than I do. But
My 60-second elevator advice to any new mayor would be to set important public and strategic goals with deadlines, measure performance relentlessly and openly and transparently for all to see, and lift up the leaders in your organization and in your communities.
All great pieces of advice. I would probably say never forget about the human faces behind every single policy decision you make. Hey, thank you all so much for coming, and let's give a big hand to all of our panelists.